Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi, and today we're going to get our big brains on. I'm sure most of you that have been around the channel for a while are aware that primarily my education and expertise is in the finance economic fields. But the other thing that I did during my primary and secondary educations was focus on psychology, in particular group think. And today we are going to talk about the psychology of free-to-play games and how it relates to things like your daily deals, and more recently on Arena Golden Packs, because those things may not be what you think they are. So stay tuned. Before we get into all that, take just a second and smash the like button. Truly, it'll only take a moment to do all of those YouTube things, and it really helps the community. Speaking of community, if you haven't been seeing our community updates, take a moment, tap the bell icon, and update your notification settings. There's a lot of great information, and your voice can help shape the future of the channel. Now, what were we talking about? Oh, yeah, right. Now, for those that don't know, I actually cover two Magic the Gathering games here on YouTube. Of course, Arena is the primary one, but more recently I have been delving into Spellslinger and talking about the economics there as well, because frankly, I think it's just as interesting and, well, possibly more so. And ever since Spellslinger came out, one of the things that people talk about most positively with that is that the daily deals there is always something free. More often than not, that is a common card or some amount of gold. So not a lot of real value there, but you can't really look a gift horse in the mouth, as the old saying goes. And for those that maybe haven't picked up on this, it tends to be a card on the weekends when more people are logging in consistently, and gold tends to hit more often on the weekdays, obviously, because less people are logging in. So people were very excited about getting freebies there. And switching gears over to Arena for a moment, ever since Golden Packs got announced, I have heard and seen countless people on Reddit, in real world conversations, etc., talking about how Wizards has finally listened to us bitching about how bad the Arena economy is. They're finally listening. They're finally taking steps to fix it. And, well, that might be the case, but more than likely, it isn't. More than likely, they are using this as a motivational tool. And today, we are going to talk about how we got here and why it is potentially important to you, particularly if you're part of a budget or free-to-play community. Now, one may ask, how did we arrive at the concept of a free-to-play game? And it's a bit of a long story, but I'll try and keep it fairly brief here. Back in the early days of internet society, by which I mean mostly Western society, because that's where the internet first emerged and became popular, society decided that paying for access was reasonable. But by and large, we expected the content available on the internet to be free. Now, as digital entertainment started to emerge, things like video games or movies and things like that, the opposite was true. We expected to pay for those items because, after all, you pay for the game once and you get to play it forever. But very quickly, society started to wise up that even though you own that video game, whether it was hardware becoming obsolete, the software's novelty or appeal diminishing, eventually you bought a game that you didn't or couldn't play anymore. And thus the concept of a free-to-play game came along because you got to play it for free, you only invested in it what you wanted to, and when you were done with it, you really didn't feel like you were out anything. Fast forward just a few years to roughly 2019, and free-to-play games were everywhere and absolutely dominant. In fact, they represented a little over 50% of all digital game revenue. Everything. That means they were outperforming things like Xbox, PlayStation, even Nintendo. This is where the money was. And this was all despite the fact that a little over 95% of the participating players never made any purchases whatsoever. That 4.2% of free-to-play gamers that did make purchases, 55% or so were female, and the average person was between $1 and $5. In fact, 3.95% of those making purchases fell in that $1 to $5 range. So one might ask, where the hell did the money come from? The answer, of course, is whales. Interestingly enough, a term that was appropriated from the gambling industry. More on that later. But whales represent only 1/4% of all free-to-play gamers, but they account for 50% of the revenue. That means that 1 out of 400 free-to-play gamers is generating half the money. Interestingly enough, from moving from a general purchase to a whale-size purchase, it shifts from 55% female to 65% male. Interesting little tidbit there. I'm honestly not sure why that is or what it might mean. This ultimately explains why gaming companies like Wizards, aka Hasbro, will continue to offer us things like $50 wildcard bundles, large digital packages, or even a 4-pack of 30th anniversary collectible cards for $1,000 that aren't even tournament legal. They know that they can tap this whale market literally hundreds of times over while only adding to the bottom line at very little risk of alienating any of their top performing customer base, because 95% of us weren't making a purchase to begin with. Ultimately, they want more of us to act and make decisions like whales. So how do they do that? Well, while the casinos of the world are known for altering people's ability to make decisions or the decisions that they make through things like not having windows, hiding all of the clocks, and plowing you with free alcohol, free-to-play games are the realm of layered currencies. For literally decades now, the marketing industry has known that human beings in general are far more likely to make an impulse purchase using a credit card than they are with the equivalent amount of cash. The reason being is that psychologically, we don't see using our credit card in the same way as using actual money. It's less real to us. So free-to-play games are very well positioned here, as all of your financial transactions essentially have to be done with credit cards because, well, most of our digital devices don't have a cash insert option. And when you compound this with not only multiple internal currencies and nebulous exchange rates that seem to change from one functionality to another, you get an environment where people really don't know how much they're paying for an individual good or service. This becomes even more of a dominant behavior when you get into some of the less economically developed parts of the world, where not only are you using a credit card, but before you even make a purchase, you're having to use your credit card to buy a prepaid gift card to exchange from your local currency to something like US dollars or British pounds that are accepted by the game, adding just one more layer of confusion. This gives rise to games like Spellslingers, for example, that has 19 different crafting currencies, multiple ways of earning and redeeming each. So ultimately, you don't really know what you're paying to make those cards in even internal standards, much less things like actual dollars and cents. And of course, nebulous economies are not the only trick up their sleeve. Most games give a plethora of upfront freebies, whether those are very generous starting packages, introductory offers, power ups that you get a freebie when you are first introduced to it. All of these things are designed to make a game seem easy at first. And then, of course, the freebies start to dry up, and you've gotten used to progressing at a certain rate. So it's much easier now to sell you those same power ups and card packs and whatnot because you want to get back to that easy grind. And these things are nothing compared to the ultimate weapon that they have to modify our behavior, our own brains. Allow me to introduce you to our feel-good friend, Dopamine. And apologies to those of you out there that actually majored in biochemistry and could probably explain this far better than I can. In short, though, dopamine regulates your motivational factors, and it tells your brain that this feels good and you want more. In essence, it establishes your reward pathways, the things that you have become accustomed to doing so that you get that fix. In general, this can encourage high risk behaviors like gambling. Dopamine is also the reason that most human beings on the planet seem to like sex because, well, dopamine is a large part of that. Be it from the moment where you go up and take the risk of speaking to that attractive individual at your local bar scene, all the way up to later instances in which dopamine might be released in large quantities as a reward mechanism. An important thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about this particular brain chemistry is that taking the risk in having a successful outcome are not necessarily related here. For instance, if you are in a casino environment, your largest hit of dopamine comes when you place that bet at the roulette table. Then you get another dose when the ball is released. A far smaller dose is what comes along when you see the outcome if it is successful. Not to mention the offsetting serotonin release of not being successful is far smaller than the 2 releases of dopamine that you've already received from having taken the risk. So dopamine triggers on taking the risk, not necessarily when you are successful in that endeavor. Now, luckily, the vast majority of people in the world have a thing that we collectively and colloquially refer to as willpower. Our ability to recognize that something maybe isn't super good for us and we shouldn't be doing it right this minute. For instance, it's your willpower that allows you to stay on your diet despite the fact that some caring individual in your office brought in a big box of donuts for everyone. Willpower, though, is eroded over time by things like those dopamine-influenced behavioral pathways. And in the case of things like free-to-play games, believe it or not, people actually experience a guilt factor. Since they are enjoying the game, at some point their willpower to not spend money gets broken down over that guilt, thinking, I really should spend some money on this game because I've enjoyed it so much up to this point. So this circles back around to where we see things like golden packs being introduced on Arena. No, they're not finally listening to our complaints about the economy. They're not necessarily doing this in order to address those concerns. They are doing this to build purchase behaviors. One of the things that we hear the executives at Wizards of the Coast when talking about Arena is how much our players love opening packs. And the reality is, what they're really saying is, we really want our players to enjoy opening packs because of things like that dopamine reaction and the dopamine erosion of your willpower. They are creating a pathway of people buying packs and then opening those packs, both of which create a dopamine reaction. And on top of that, they're giving you a bonus golden pack for a reward, a catalyst in that behavior. That creates another dopamine trigger. And then, of course, you open that pack as well, and you get yet another little hit of dopamine. And all those hits over time change the way we think about purchases on Arena, on free to play games in general. This is also the same thing that you tend to see with offering daily deals. But here, instead of trying to catalyze your purchase behavior, they are trying to catalyze your behavior of logging into the game every day. Because if you log in every day, they get more opportunities to change your more specific purchase behaviors. And really, that's what they're after here. They want each and every one of us to act and think more like those whales that represent the lion's share of profitable transactions in gaming. But before we grab up pitchforks and torches and march upon Wizards of the Coast to reenact the January 6th incident, you should know that these marketing practices, by and large, have been found to be reasonably harmless. In fact, a number of studies suggest that the mere act of knowing about them reinforces your willpower far more than they tend to be eroded by the practices themselves. Of course, there are some exceptions out there. For instance, children are very susceptible to things like currency layering because they just don't have the experience and wherewithal to see through all of the layers. In fact, I know many adults that don't tend to see through those things. Of course, there are also people who have biochemical predispositions to things like gambling addiction. And in fact, a number of people that suffer from Parkinson's disease are treated with a chemical that greatly reinforces things like dopamine pathways. So they are far more likely to fall into addictive behaviors like this. So congratulations, just by having watched this video, you are now far less likely to fall into any traps that free-to-play games might set for you. And folks, before you go, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on a thing. Because I know I can't change the magic economy all by myself, but I think we can.